Holden Long was 42 and worked as a building operations consultant in downtown Chicago. Everyone in the Whitaker believed he was an ordinary maintenance professional with a modest income. His old Ford truck faded jacket and habit of carrying lunch from home seemed to prove it. Vanessa Hart certainly believed it when he let her keep the apartment they had shared for 8 years. What she didn't know was that Holden owned the entire 17th floor. The moment her new boyfriend changed the locks, Holden quietly reached into his pocket and touched the brass master key. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, leave your country and local time in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories where patience evidence and quiet strength win, in the end, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 8 years earlier, Holden Long had walked into the Whitaker building, carrying 2 cardboard boxes, a duffel bag, and a folded floor lamp that barely fit through the revolving front door. The Whitaker stood on a quiet corner of River North in Chicago. It wasn't one of the glittering glass towers overlooking the Chicago River. It wasn't the kind of place influencers photographed for social media. But it was solid. Red brick, thick walls, large windows. The kind of building that survived recessions because people actually wanted to live there. Vanessa Hart loved it immediately. The exposed brick, the high ceilings, the hardwood floors, the view from the 17th floor. At the time, she believed they had found something special together. Holden never corrected that assumption. He simply carried the boxes inside. The apartment was Unit 17B. It would become their home for the next 8 years. Back then, Holden was already financially secure, not rich in the flashy sense, not the type who bought Ferraris or penthouses, but secure enough that money rarely kept him awake at night. Very few people knew that. The reason could be traced back to his father. Walter Long had built a successful construction company during the late 1980s. Then he made a mistake that Holden never forgot. Walter loved displaying success. Luxury cars, country club memberships, expensive watches. People admired him when business was booming. The admiration disappeared when the market collapsed. Within 3 years, most of his wealth was gone. The people who had crowded around him vanished too. Holden watched the entire thing happen. He was 16 years old. The lesson stayed with him. Never confuse attention with respect. Never advertise what doesn't need advertising. Years later, after graduating from Northwestern University, Holden built a career in property operations and urban development consulting. He learned how buildings worked, how investors thought, how distressed properties could become profitable. Most importantly, he learned patience. While others chased quick profits, Holden quietly accumulated assets, small investments first, then larger ones, then partnerships, then ownership stakes. The process took years. Nobody noticed because he never looked wealthy. He still drove practical vehicles, still wore inexpensive clothes, still preferred diners over luxury restaurants. The habit confused people. It also protected him. When Holden met Vanessa, she found his calm nature attractive. She worked in corporate event planning. She was energetic, ambitious, and outgoing, the opposite of Holden in many ways. Their differences seemed to balance each other, at least in the beginning. The first 2 years felt easy. Weekend trips to Wisconsin, dinner dates after work, long conversations in the apartment overlooking the city lights. Friends described them as stable, reliable, built to last. But stability often looks boring when compared to excitement, especially when people start comparing their lives to everyone else's. The changes appeared gradually. A comment here, a complaint there. Vanessa began noticing things she previously ignored. Holden's old truck, his simple wardrobe, his refusal to spend money on status symbols. At first she joked about it, then she criticized it. Eventually she became embarrassed by it. Social media didn't help. Neither did her professional circle. Many of her colleagues worked with wealthy executives and entrepreneurs. Their lives seemed glamorous from the outside. Private clubs, luxury vacations, exclusive events. The more Vanessa saw those lifestyles, the more ordinary Holden appeared. What she never saw was where Holden's money actually went. Every quarter, he quietly purchased another ownership stake, another investment, another asset, another opportunity. He preferred real estate. Buildings generated cash flow. Buildings appreciated. Buildings survived market swings better than trends. One particular opportunity appeared 6 years before the breakup. The Whitaker's 17th floor was partially owned by an aging investment group based in Milwaukee. Several partners wanted out. The floor contained 6 residential units and additional storage space. Most investors ignored it. Holden didn't. He spent months reviewing documents, analyzing maintenance records, examining occupancy rates, calculating long-term value. Then he purchased a minority share. A year later, he purchased another, then another, then another. Each transaction went through Long Urban Holdings, LLC, a company most people had never heard of. The company's mailing address wasn't even connected to Holden's apartment. There was no obvious trail for casual observers. That was intentional. By the time Holden acquired majority ownership, nobody inside the Whitaker realized the quiet man living in Unit 17B controlled most of the floor. Not even Vanessa. Especially not Vanessa. She never asked questions about building ownership. Never asked who funded renovations. Never asked why certain improvements appeared almost immediately after residents requested them. She simply assumed management handled everything. Holden never volunteered explanations. He preferred privacy. That privacy eventually created a dangerous misunderstanding. Vanessa began viewing Holden through appearances alone. A quiet man, a practical man, a predictable man. The kind of man she thought would never become more than he already was. One evening, she attended a networking reception at a luxury hotel near Michigan Avenue. The event featured developers, brokers, investors, and marketing executives. Vanessa arrived expecting another routine corporate gathering. Instead, she met Bradley Pierce. Bradley knew exactly how to make an entrance. Tailored navy suit, Rolex submariner, perfect smile, perfect hair, stories about luxury developments in Miami and Scottsdale, stories about celebrity clients, stories about million-dollar transactions. People listened when Bradley spoke. He made sure of that. Vanessa listened too, for nearly an hour, then 2, then 3. When she finally returned home that night, Holden was sitting at the kitchen counter reviewing maintenance proposals for a commercial client. The apartment was quiet. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. Holden looked up and smiled. "How was the event?" Vanessa hesitated. For just a second. Then she smiled back. "It was interesting." Holden nodded and returned to his paperwork. He didn't ask for details. He rarely did. Vanessa walked toward the bedroom. As she disappeared down the hallway, her phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. "Bradley Pierce. Great meeting you tonight. Looking forward to seeing you again." Vanessa stared at the message longer than necessary. Then she locked the screen. Behind her, Holden continued reading documents. From the outside, everything looked exactly the same. Inside the apartment, however, something had already begun to shift, and neither of them yet understood how expensive that shift would become. Bradley Pierce looked like the kind of man who belonged on magazine covers. The first time Holden saw him in person, the man stepped out of a black Porsche 911, parked illegally outside a hotel on Michigan Avenue. The valet rushed over before Bradley even reached for the door handle. That small detail caught Holden's attention, not because he cared about expensive cars, because he noticed how much Bradley enjoyed being noticed. The observation came months after Vanessa had first met him. By then, Bradley's name appeared regularly in conversations. At first, it was harmless, a funny story from a networking event, a successful deal Bradley had closed, a luxury property Bradley had toured, a celebrity Bradley supposedly knew. The stories accumulated slowly, like drops of water wearing down stone. Holden rarely interrupted. He listened. He always listened. One evening, Vanessa sat across from him at the kitchen island, scrolling through Instagram. Outside, snow drifted across downtown Chicago. Inside, the apartment felt unusually cold. "Bradley just sold a penthouse for $6 million, she said. Holden looked up from a maintenance proposal. "That's impressive." Vanessa waited, as though expecting something more. When nothing came, she sighed. "Don't you ever wish you aimed higher?" Holden studied her expression. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." She shrugged. "More ambition, maybe." The words hung between them. Holden returned his attention to the paperwork, not because he didn't care, because he was thinking. Ambition had never been the issue. Visibility was. Most people confused the two. Vanessa increasingly seemed to be one of them. The following months brought more comparisons. The comparisons were rarely direct, but they were constant. Bradley owned this. Bradley invested in that. Bradley vacationed here. Bradley wore this brand. Bradley drove that car. Eventually, Holden noticed a pattern. Bradley wasn't simply appearing in conversation. He was becoming the standard by which Vanessa measured everything, including him. The apartment changed too. Small things disappeared. Framed photos, weekend traditions, shared routines. The signs were subtle, but they were there. Holden saw them. He simply chose not to react immediately. Years working in property negotiations had taught him something valuable. People often revealed their true intentions when nobody rushed them. Pressure exposed character. Patience exposed truth. One Friday evening, Holden returned home earlier than expected. A client meeting had been canceled. The apartment appeared empty. At first. Then he heard laughter, coming from the balcony. He stepped outside. Vanessa stood near the railing holding a glass of wine. Bradley stood beside her. Neither expected Holden to arrive. The surprise flashed across Vanessa's face first. Bradley recovered quickly. Too quickly. "There he is," Bradley said with a smile. "Vanessa's been telling me all about you." Holden extended his hand. Bradley shook it. Firm grip. Practiced confidence. Salesman energy. The type Holden had encountered countless times in real estate negotiations. Bradley immediately began talking. About himself. About developments. About opportunities. About success. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. During those 15 minutes, Bradley asked Holden almost nothing. That told Holden everything he needed to know. People interested in understanding others ask questions. People interested only in themselves give speeches. After Bradley left, silence filled the apartment. Vanessa finally spoke. "He's helping me expand my network." Holden nodded. "That's good." Again, she seemed disappointed by his calm response. "What does that mean?" "It means networking can help your career." "No, I mean, don't you think it's strange?" Holden looked at her. "Do you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the kitchen. The discussion ended there, but the distance between them continued growing. Weeks became months. The arguments became more frequent. Still not explosive. Not yet. Instead, they centered around expectations. Vanessa wanted movement, status, recognition, a future she could display. Holden offered stability, consistency, security, a future he believed mattered more than appearances. Neither could convince the other. One Saturday afternoon, Vanessa attended a luxury real estate gala at the Drake Hotel. Holden declined the invitation. He had no interest in spending 3 hours discussing market trends with strangers. Vanessa went alone. Bradley was there. Photographs appeared online the following morning. Holden saw them accidentally. A mutual acquaintance had shared them. Vanessa and Bradley standing together, laughing, holding champagne glasses, looking comfortable, very comfortable. Holden stared at the image for several seconds. Then he closed the application. No confrontation, no accusations, no dramatic scene, just quiet observation. That evening, Vanessa returned home after midnight. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume and hotel ballroom flowers. Holden was sitting in the living room reading. He marked his place in the book. "Good event." Vanessa removed her coat. "It was amazing." Then she paused. "Bradley thinks I should start aiming for executive-level clients." "Maybe you should." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You really don't care, do you?" Holden looked confused. "About your career?" "No." She shook her head. "About losing me." The room became still. For the first time, Holden understood the real conversation. Not career, not networking, not Bradley. Validation. She wanted proof that he would fight, that he would become emotional, possessive, desperate, something. Instead, Holden answered honestly, "If you're unhappy, pretending otherwise won't fix it." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa stared at him, then walked away. 3 weeks later, she requested dinner, just the two of them, at Chicago Prime Steakhouse, a place she had recently become fond of. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. Holden arrived exactly on time. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights. The atmosphere felt expensive, polished, controlled, much like Vanessa herself. Dinner began politely. They discussed work, friends, travel, everything except the obvious subject. Finally, Vanessa placed her wine glass on the table. The movement was deliberate, prepared, rehearsed. "Holden." He looked up. "We need to talk." The sentence surprised him less than it should have. He had been expecting it for months. She took a breath. "I don't think we're right for each other anymore." No anger, no tears, just certainty. Around them, conversations continued. Silverware clinked against plates. Servers moved between tables. The city glowed beyond the windows. Holden remained quiet. Vanessa continued, "I want something different." He nodded. "What does different mean?" "A bigger life." There it was. Not another person. Not betrayal. Not unhappiness. A bigger life, or at least her definition of one. Holden considered the phrase, then nodded again. "If that's what you want." Vanessa blinked, almost surprised. "You don't have anything else to say." "What would you like me to say?" For the first time, uncertainty appeared on her face. The conversation wasn't unfolding according to the script she had imagined. Then something caught Holden's attention. Near the bar, 40 feet away, Bradley Pierce, holding a drink, watching, not hiding, not particularly trying to conceal his presence, just close enough to send a message. Holden understood immediately. The dinner had never been about closure. It had been a transition, one chapter ending, another already waiting nearby. He looked back at Vanessa. Suddenly, many unanswered questions made sense. The networking events, the comparisons, the growing distance, the frustration, the timing, everything. Still, he remained calm. "What happens to the apartment?" Vanessa asked. There it was, the practical question, the question she cared about most. Holden took a sip of water. "You can keep it." Her eyes widened. "What? You stay in 17B?" She stared at him, trying to determine whether there was a catch, a negotiation, a hidden condition. There wasn't. Just like that, just like that. Relief flooded across her face, then satisfaction, then something else, victory. Across the room, Bradley smiled. He thought he understood what had just happened. Vanessa thought she understood too. Neither of them did, because while they were celebrating possession of one apartment, they still had no idea who actually owned the floor beneath their feet. And that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive. The move-out process took Holden Long exactly 11 days, not because he had much to pack, because he refused to rush. For 8 years, Unit 17B had been home. Every shelf, Every window, every mark on the hardwood floor carried a memory. Some good, some painful. All of them deserved a proper ending. Holden approached the separation the same way he approached everything else in life, methodically, one box at a time, one decision at a time. No drama, no revenge, no late-night arguments. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Bradley were already acting as if the apartment belonged entirely to them. The shift happened almost immediately after the breakup dinner. Bradley began spending more nights at the Whitaker, then entire weekends, then weekdays. Soon residents assumed he lived there. He certainly behaved as though he did. He parked his Porsche in visitor spaces. He greeted doormen by first name. He spoke confidently about future plans for the building. Several neighbors found him charming. Others found him exhausting. Diane Keller belonged firmly to the second group. As building manager, Diane had worked at the Whitaker for nearly 15 years. She knew every resident, every contractor, every recurring problem. Most importantly, she knew how to recognize people who mistook confidence for authority. Bradley displayed that habit constantly. The first warning sign appeared less than a week after Holden moved out. Bradley approached Diane at the front desk. "Quick question," he said. Diane looked up from a maintenance report. "Sure." "Who handles leasing opportunities on 17?" The question sounded casual. Too casual. Diane answered carefully. "What kind of leasing opportunities?" Bradley smiled. "Just curious." Diane returned the smile. She didn't answer. Instead, she watched him walk away. Years of experience told her something important. People who are merely curious ask one question. People with plans ask several. Bradley asked several. Over the next 2 weeks, he returned repeatedly. Questions about occupancy, questions about storage rooms, questions about maintenance schedules, questions about vacant units, questions about ownership structures. Nothing individually suspicious. Together, they formed a pattern. Diane noticed. She wasn't the only one. Holden noticed too. Not because Diane reported it. Not yet. Because Holden understood human behavior. People rarely stop at what they're given. They immediately start wondering what else they can take. One rainy Thursday evening, Holden returned to Unit 17B to collect his final belongings. The last trip. 3 small boxes, a desk lamp, a framed photograph of his parents. Nothing more. The elevator doors opened onto the 17th floor. Immediately, something felt different. Voices echoed through the hallway. Strangers, tools, metal, movement. Holden stepped around the corner, then stopped. A locksmith knelt beside the door to Unit 17B. The old lock sat on a protective cloth. The new one was already halfway installed. Bradley stood nearby holding a coffee. Vanessa leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone. Neither appeared surprised to see Holden. In fact, Bradley smiled, as though he had been expecting the moment. "Morning," Bradley said. The locksmith glanced up nervously. Vanessa folded her arms. "We're changing the locks." Holden looked at the door, then the old lock, then the paperwork clipped to the technician's clipboard. No reaction, no anger, no raised voice, just observation. Years of property management had taught him something valuable. The first person who becomes emotional usually loses information. Holden preferred gathering information. The locksmith cleared his throat. "Are you Holden?" "Yes." The man looked uncomfortable. "I was told everything had been approved." Holden nodded. "I don't doubt that." Bradley smirked. The response clearly disappointed him. He had expected resistance, perhaps an argument, maybe even a scene. Instead, Holden set down one of the boxes. "Almost finished?" he asked the locksmith. The technician nodded. 5 minutes. "Good." Then Holden stepped aside. The hallway became strangely quiet. Bradley finally broke the silence. "You know most people would have moved on already." Holden looked at him. "Most people?" "Yeah." Bradley shrugged. After a breakup? Holden nodded once. Maybe. Nothing more. Again, the lack of reaction frustrated Bradley. It showed. His smile tightened. His posture stiffened. People who rely on provoking others often become irritated when their efforts fail. 5 minutes later, the locksmith completed the installation. The new lock clicked. The door opened. The technician handed over paperwork. Bradley signed. Vanessa signed. Then the locksmith left. As soon as the elevator doors closed behind him, Bradley turned toward Holden. Well, he tapped the new smart lock. Looks like that's that. Holden glanced at the hardware. Premium model, commercial grade, expensive, installed professionally. He noticed the contractor number, the invoice code, the company logo. Then he noticed something else. Bradley had authorized work on a unit he legally did not control. Interesting. Very interesting. Holden picked up his final box. Take care of the place. Vanessa laughed softly. The laugh carried something new. Not happiness. Superiority. The belief that she had won. We will. Holden nodded, then turned toward the elevator. Halfway down the hallway, he stopped. A sound caught his attention. Behind him, Bradley was speaking again. Not to Holden, to Vanessa. You know what's funny? Vanessa smiled. What? This entire floor has potential. Holden continued walking, slowly, listening. You can do a lot with 6 units, Bradley said. Imagine what they're worth if someone managed them correctly. Vanessa laughed. I barely understand how any of that works. You don't need to. Bradley sounded confident. Too confident. I do. The elevator doors opened. Holden stepped inside. The conversation ended, but not before he had learned exactly what he needed. Bradley wasn't interested only in Vanessa. He wasn't interested only in the apartment. He was interested in the floor. The realization settled quietly into place. Back downstairs, Holden crossed the lobby. Diane stood behind the front desk reviewing reports. She looked up. Everything okay? Holden paused. Depends. Diane lowered the paperwork. What happened? He explained the lock change, briefly, factually. No emotion. No complaints. When he finished, Diane shook her head. I was wondering when that would happen. Holden stopped. Bradley's been asking questions. What kind of questions? Diane glanced around the lobby, then lowered her voice. Questions about ownership. Holden listened carefully. She described the conversations, the repeated visits, the growing curiosity, the attempts to learn who controlled the 17th floor. The more she spoke, the more a picture emerged, a very clear picture. When Diane finished, Holden asked only one question. Has he been upstairs anywhere besides 17B? I don't know. That answer bothered him. Not because he suspected damage, because uncertainty creates risk, especially in real estate, especially around people chasing opportunities they don't fully understand. A few moments later, Diane handed him a visitor access report. Thought you might want this. Holden reviewed the document. Names, dates, elevator records, entry logs. Most appeared normal. One entry did not. 3 nights earlier, Bradley had attempted access to a service corridor connected to the 17th floor. Access denied. Holden read the line twice, then folded the report. The service corridor wasn't visible from public areas. Most residents didn't even know it existed, which raised an important question. How had Bradley learned about it? The answer mattered. A lot. Because suddenly, this situation looked much larger than a failed relationship. And for the first time since the breakup, Holden began to suspect that Bradley Pierce might be chasing something far more valuable than Vanessa Hart. Holden Long spent the next 48 hours doing what he always did when faced with uncertainty. He gathered facts, not assumptions, not emotions, Facts. On Monday morning, he sat alone in a conference room overlooking LaSalle Street, reviewing a stack of documents nearly 3 inches thick. Property records, ownership transfers, maintenance contracts, access logs, insurance policies. Most people would have found the paperwork painfully boring. Holden found it reassuring. Documents told the truth when people didn't. The 17th floor of the Whitaker had become one of his most successful investments precisely because he understood details others ignored. The story had started 6 years earlier. At the time, the floor was fragmented. 6 separate residential units, multiple aging investors, complicated ownership agreements, outdated maintenance systems. Several partners wanted to sell. Most buyers stayed away. The structure looked messy. Messy deals scared people. Holden loved messy deals. Messy deals created opportunity. The first acquisition was Unit 17F, then 17E, then partial interests connected to common areas, storage rights, mechanical access easements, additional ownership percentages. One transaction led to another. One seller referred another. Year after year, Holden quietly expanded his position. Never aggressively, never publicly, just patiently. Eventually, Long Urban Holdings, LLC, controlled the entire floor. Every residential unit, every storage room, every maintenance easement, every access corridor, everything. The process had taken years. Almost nobody knew it had happened. The arrangement was legal, transparent, properly documented, but invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically searching for it, which explained why Vanessa had never discovered it. She never looked. The apartment had always been enough, until it wasn't. Now Bradley was looking, and that concerned Holden, not because Bradley could threaten ownership. He couldn't. The legal protections were too strong. The concern was simpler. People chasing assets they don't understand often create expensive problems. Around noon, Holden arrived at a law office near Wacker Drive. The brass plaque outside the building read Sutton and Mercer Property Law Group. Rebecca Sutton greeted him personally. She was 55 years old and had spent 3 decades dismantling bad real estate deals. Tall, sharp-eyed, direct, the kind of attorney who preferred preparation over courtroom theatrics. One of the reasons Holden trusted her. "Good to see you," she said. "Wish the circumstances were better." "Usually are." Rebecca led him into her office. Large windows overlooked downtown Chicago. Several framed court victories decorated the walls. A legal assistant delivered coffee. Then the meeting began. Holden explained everything. The breakup, the apartment, the lock change, Bradley's questions, the service corridor access attempt. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "What do you think he's after?" Holden considered the question. "The floor." Rebecca nodded. "Same conclusion I reached." That surprised him slightly. "What did you find?" Rebecca opened a file. Inside were several printed pages. "Bradley Pierce has a reputation." "Good or bad?" "Depends who you ask." Never a comforting answer. Rebecca slid the documents across the desk. Holden began reading. Bradley wasn't technically a developer, nor was he a major investor. He was primarily a luxury leasing broker. Sales-focused, commission-driven, aggressive. Several former clients described him as ambitious. Others used less flattering language. There were no criminal records, no lawsuits of significance, nothing immediately alarming. Yet something bothered Rebecca. "Keep reading." Holden turned another page, then another. Eventually, he noticed it. A pattern. Bradley frequently positioned himself near properties undergoing ownership transitions, buildings with unclear management structures, developments between investors, assets surrounded by uncertainty. Not illegal, just interesting. Rebecca tapped the page. "He's attracted to confusion." Holden nodded slowly. People could profit from confusion, especially in real estate, especially when others didn't understand who controlled what. The attorney opened another folder. This concerns me more. Inside were photographs, security images, access reports, visitor logs, records from the Whitaker. Diane had already forwarded everything. Rebecca had analyzed it before Holden arrived. Together they reviewed the evidence, the service corridor attempt, repeated visits, questions about ownership, questions about vacancies, questions about future development plans. The pieces began fitting together. Not enough for conclusions, enough for concern. "What about Vanessa?" Holden asked. Rebecca closed the file. "What about her? How involved is she?" The attorney thought for a moment. "Hard to tell." Holden looked down at the documents. Rebecca continued. "Based on what you've described, I think she's focused on appearances." "And Bradley?" "Opportunity." The distinction mattered. Vanessa wanted status. Bradley wanted access. The combination could become dangerous. A few hours later, Holden returned to the Whitaker. Instead of going home, he headed directly to the 17th floor. The hallway was quiet. Soft lighting reflected across polished hardwood floors. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Holden walked toward a door near the eastern end of the corridor. Most residents assumed it led to storage. Technically it did. Partially. The room beyond served several functions: archived building records, maintenance equipment, ownership documentation, network infrastructure, mechanical systems, the kind of space nobody noticed, the kind of space Bradley seemed strangely interested in. Holden unlocked the door, entered, conducted a thorough inspection. Nothing appeared disturbed. No missing documents. No signs of forced entry. Still, he changed several security settings, updated access credentials, reviewed surveillance coverage, then locked everything again. Experience had taught him another important lesson. You don't wait for problems to become emergencies. You address them while they're still manageable. As he stepped back into the hallway, the elevator doors opened. Vanessa emerged. For a moment, neither spoke. The encounter was unexpected. Vanessa glanced toward the storage area, then back at Holden. "What are you doing up here?" "Checking something." She folded her arms. "You don't live here anymore." The statement sounded rehearsed, as though she had repeated it several times before. Holden simply nodded. "That's true." Vanessa waited, again expecting an argument, again receiving none. The lack of conflict seemed to frustrate her. "Bradley says you're having people watch us." "Interesting." Holden remained calm. "Does he... Are you... No?" That answer was technically true. He wasn't watching them. He was protecting his property. Different thing entirely. Vanessa looked unconvinced. Then the elevator opened again. Bradley stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. His expression changed immediately when he saw Holden. The smile appeared first, the fake kind, the practiced kind. "Holden." "Bradley." The hallway grew quiet. Bradley's eyes briefly drifted toward the secured door. Just for a second. But Holden noticed. He always noticed. Then Bradley looked back at him. "You know," Bradley said casually. "I've been thinking. Dangerous words. People often announced bad ideas that way." "About what?" "This floor." There it was again. Not the apartment. The floor. Bradley gestured around them. "Lots of unrealized potential." Holden said nothing. Bradley continued. "Luxury rentals, corporate housing, executive suites." Vanessa smiled, clearly impressed. Bradley looked around the hallway as though evaluating future profits. Meanwhile, Holden noticed something else. Bradley wasn't imagining possibilities. He was calculating. The difference mattered. A lot. Because people imagining possibilities dream. People calculating profits act. And suddenly Holden became certain of one thing. Bradley Pierce wasn't merely curious anymore. He was already making plans. The question was whether those plans had already gone further than anyone realized, and the answer arrived sooner than Holden expected. The very next morning, in the form of a visitor deposit receipt that should never have existed. The receipt arrived in Diane Keller's inbox at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning. At first glance, it looked ordinary. A scanned payment confirmation, a client name, a deposit amount, a signature, the kind of paperwork that moved through real estate offices every day. Except the Whitaker wasn't leasing anything on the 17th floor, and nobody had authorized deposits. Diane realized that immediately. By 8:25, the document was sitting in Holden Long's inbox. By 8:40, Holden was reading every line. The deposit totaled $12,500, large enough to matter, small enough that many people wouldn't question it. The client was listed as an executive relocating from Dallas. The payment purpose was even more interesting. Priority reservation for future luxury residents. Holden read that line twice, then a third time. There were no future luxury residences. There were no approved conversions, no development plans, no leasing opportunities, nothing. Yet someone had accepted money from a prospective tenant. Someone had made promises, and Holden already knew exactly who that someone was. The question was, how far Bradley had gone. A few minutes later, Holden was seated in Rebecca Sutton's office. The attorney studied the document silently. Then she placed it on her desk. "This is worse than I expected." Holden nodded. "I thought you'd say that." Rebecca leaned back. "One deposit means there could be more." That possibility bothered Holden, not because of the money, because every transaction created potential liability, confused investors, angry tenants, fraud complaints, civil claims, problems multiplied quickly in real estate, especially when documentation existed. Rebecca opened her notebook. "Let's assume Bradley believes he can eventually gain influence over the floor." "Okay. What would he do first?" Holden thought for several seconds. "Create perceived authority." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Exactly. Authority was often an illusion. People rarely verified claims. They accepted confidence as proof. Bradley understood that, perhaps too well." The attorney pointed toward the receipt. "This isn't really about money." "What is it about validation?" Holden waited. If people start giving him deposits, they start treating him like the decision maker. That made sense. Authority attracts authority. Once enough people believe someone is in charge, others often follow. The mechanism wasn't complicated. It was dangerous, especially when built on lies. Later that afternoon, Holden visited the Whitaker. The lobby was busy. Residents came and went. Deliveries arrived. Maintenance crews moved equipment. Everything appeared normal. Only Diane knew otherwise. She met Holden near the management office. "There's more." Those words rarely led anywhere good. Diane handed him a folder. Inside were visitor logs from the previous 3 weeks. Holden reviewed them carefully. Several names appeared repeatedly. Most were unfamiliar. A few worked in commercial real estate. Others appeared connected to investment groups. One individual represented a corporate housing company. Another managed executive relocation services. Interesting. Very interesting. "Have they been meeting Bradley?" Holden asked. Diane nodded. "Mostly upstairs. In 17B. Usually." That confirmed it. Bradley wasn't simply talking. He was presenting, selling, pitching. The operation was growing, and Vanessa was standing right in the middle of it. Whether she understood that fact remained unclear. That evening, Holden parked across the street from a restaurant near Gold Coast. Not because he was following anyone, because Rebecca had arranged a meeting with a private investigator named Marcus Flynn. Marcus specialized in commercial fraud cases, former federal investigator. Calm, precise. The kind of man who observed more than he spoke. Holden appreciated that. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Together they reviewed timelines, access records, photographs, property documents. The investigator asked thoughtful questions, particularly about Vanessa. "Do you think she knows?" Holden considered the question carefully. "I don't know." It was the most honest answer available. Marcus nodded. "Then don't assume either way." Good advice. Many investigations failed because people rushed toward conclusions. Holden preferred evidence. The investigator closed his notebook. "I'll start quietly. What are you looking for?" "Patterns." Another answer Holden respected. Patterns told stories. Individual incidents could be accidents. Patterns rarely were. 3 days later, the first pattern emerged. Bradley had begun hosting informal tours, not open public events, private appointments, invitation only, potential investors, potential tenants, potential partners. The meetings all followed the same structure. Guests arrived. Vanessa welcomed them. Bradley conducted the presentation. The floor became the centerpiece. The apartment merely served as a showroom. One visitor later described the experience to Marcus. "He acted like he owned the place." That sentence found its way into a report, then onto Holden's desk. The words bothered him less than expected, because by now Bradley's behavior was entirely predictable. What bothered him more was the confidence. Confidence suggested planning. Planning suggested preparation. Preparation suggested something larger. That suspicion intensified on Saturday. A resident named Charles Morton accidentally provided another piece of information. Charles lived on the 15th floor, retired accountant, observant, reliable. He stopped Diane in the lobby. "Who's running tours upstairs?" Diane kept her expression neutral. "What tours?" Charles looked surprised. "The luxury housing presentations." Within an hour, Holden had a written statement. According to Charles, Bradley had been discussing future renovations, executive rental packages, premium concierge services, projected rental rates, revenue estimates. The presentation sounded remarkably professional, almost as though months of preparation existed behind it. Yet none of it was real. That was the problem. Real plans have documents, permits, approvals, contracts. Bradley's plans had none of those things, only promises. Promises eventually become evidence, especially when money changes hands. Sunday afternoon brought another development. Marcus called Holden directly. "I found something." The investigator rarely sounded excited. Today he did. "What is it?" 2 additional deposits. Holden sat up straighter. "Confirmed. Confirmed. Not 1 client. 3. Not 1 deposit. 3. The total now exceeded $30,000. The situation had crossed an important threshold. Mistakes become misunderstandings. Patterns become schemes. The distinction mattered legally. Very much. That evening, Holden reviewed the evidence spread across his dining table. Visitor logs, statements, access records, deposit confirmations, photographs. The pile continued growing, yet one detail remained strangely absent. Vanessa. Her involvement appeared surprisingly limited. She attended meetings, hosted guests, welcomed visitors, but Bradley seemed careful about documentation, almost as if he wanted responsibility concentrated elsewhere. Rebecca noticed the same thing. During a late-night phone call, she shared her concern. "He may be using her." Holden stared out the window. Chicago's skyline glowed in the distance. "Probably. That doesn't make her innocent." "No." Silence followed. Then Rebecca continued. "But it might make her useful." Useful. The word lingered after the call ended. Not because Holden wanted leverage, because he wanted clarity. The truth mattered, nothing else. Monday morning arrived with another surprise. A delivery driver mistakenly dropped off an envelope intended for Unit 17B at the management office. Inside was a promotional packet. Professional quality, expensive printing, elegant branding. The headline immediately caught Diane's attention. Private executive residences coming soon to the Whitaker. The brochure featured renderings, floor plans, projected amenities, luxury descriptions, market projections. Everything looked legitimate. Everything looked impressive. Everything was false. By noon, Holden, Rebecca, and Marcus were reviewing copies. The room remained silent for several moments. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "He's escalating." Nobody disagreed, because the brochures changed everything. Deposits could be explained away. Conversations could be denied. Promises could be misunderstood. Printed marketing materials were different. Printed materials demonstrated intent, preparation, planning, deliberate action, exactly the kind of evidence attorneys preferred. Holden looked down at the brochure, then at the floor plans. One particular detail stood out. The plans included access to areas never shown publicly. Storage rooms, service corridors, restricted spaces, information Bradley should not possess. The realization settled heavily across the room. Someone had either shown him those areas, or he had found a way to learn about them himself. Neither possibility was good. Marcus leaned forward. "There's something else." Holden looked up. "What?" The investigator slid another document across the table. A reservation list, names, phone numbers, deposit amounts, future move-in dates, nearly a dozen prospects. The operation was much larger than anyone had assumed. Rebecca closed the file slowly. Then she looked directly at Holden. "We're past curiosity." Holden nodded. She was right. Far past curiosity. Far past ambition. Far past harmless posturing. Bradley Pierce was no longer pretending to have authority. He was actively selling it. And very soon, he was going to discover exactly who actually owned the thing he had been promising to everyone else. Rebecca Sutton mailed the letter on a Wednesday morning. Not because email would have been ineffective, because certified mail creates a paper trail. Paper trails mattered, especially when people were about to pretend they had never been warned. The envelope contained 12 pages, precise language, clear instructions, no threats, no emotional arguments, just facts. The letter informed Vanessa Hart that her continued occupancy of Unit 17B remained permitted under the temporary housing arrangement established after the separation. It also outlined restrictions: no commercial activity, no property marketing, no leasing representations, no investor tours, no access to units beyond 17B, no authority to advertise any portion of the 17th floor. Simple, reasonable, legally sound. A second letter addressed Bradley Pierce directly. That one was shorter, far less friendly. By Friday afternoon, both had been delivered. The reaction arrived faster than Rebecca expected. At 9:15 Monday morning, Holden's receptionist called his office. "You have a visitor." Holden glanced up from his desk. "Who?" The receptionist hesitated. "Vanessa." Not surprising. Holden closed the document he had been reviewing. "Send her in." A few moments later, Vanessa entered. The change in her appearance was noticeable, not physically, emotionally. She moved with the confidence of someone expecting a confrontation, almost eager for it. A thick envelope sat in her hand, the certified letter, unopened, or mostly unopened. She dropped it onto Holden's desk. The paper slid across the polished surface. "What is this?" Holden looked down, then back at her. "A legal notice." "Don't do that." "What? Act like I'm stupid." Her voice sharpened. The receptionist quietly closed the office door behind her. The room became silent. Holden remained seated. Vanessa stayed standing. That alone irritated her. She wanted conflict. She wanted energy. She wanted a reaction. Instead, she found the same calm expression she had spent years trying to understand. "You hired a lawyer?" "Yes." "For me?" "No." Holden folded his hands. "For the property." The distinction landed harder than intended. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "The property. That's what the letter concerns." She laughed, a short, sharp laugh, the kind people use when trying to dismiss something they don't fully understand. "Bradley read it." "Interesting. Not I read it. Bradley read it." Holden noticed immediately. "And he says it's intimidation." There it was. Exactly the response Holden expected. Not because Bradley was confident, because confidence often collapses when confronted with paperwork. People uncomfortable with documents usually attack the people who send them, easier than addressing the contents. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You actually paid an attorney to send this?" "Yes." "Why?" Holden looked at her carefully. Because despite everything that had happened, he still wanted to understand how she viewed the situation. "What part is confusing?" Her expression hardened. "This apartment." She gestured toward the window. "The floor. The building. Everything." Now Holden understood. Not the words, the mindset. Vanessa still believed the issue was personal. She thought this was about the breakup, about hurt feelings, about control. She still didn't realize the situation had moved far beyond that. "The letter isn't about us," Holden said. "That's exactly what someone would say if it was." He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he opened a drawer and removed a folder. Inside were several printed documents. Nothing dramatic, just records. He placed them on the desk. Vanessa didn't touch them, didn't even look. That told Holden more than the documents themselves. People seeking truth examine evidence. People seeking validation avoid it. "Take these." "I'm not interested." "I know." The answer caught her off guard. For a second, she didn't know what to say. Then anger returned, predictably. "Bradley was right about you." Holden said nothing. "You're bitter." Still nothing. "You couldn't stand seeing me move on." Nothing. Each accusation landed against silence, and silence has a strange effect on angry people. It forces them to hear themselves. Vanessa shifted her weight. The certainty she had entered with seemed weaker now. Not because Holden had defeated her argument, because he refused to participate in it. Finally, she grabbed the letter from the desk. "We're not stopping anything." There it was, the first meaningful statement of the meeting. Not a denial, not confusion, a decision. Holden nodded. "I understand. You don't get to tell us what to do." Again. Interesting wording. Us. Not me. Us. Bradley's influence appeared everywhere now, even in her language. Vanessa turned toward the door, then stopped. One final attempt. One final jab. "Maybe if you'd shown this much energy during our relationship, things would have worked." The sentence hung in the air, waiting, expecting impact. Holden considered it briefly, then answered honestly. "Maybe." The simplicity of the response robbed it of power. Vanessa stared at him, frustrated, confused. Then she left. The office door closed. The room became quiet again. Holden looked at the untouched documents still resting on his desk. Not one page had been examined. Not one fact had been questioned. The meeting had never been about understanding, only defending a belief. And beliefs can be remarkably expensive when reality arrives. Later that afternoon, Rebecca called. "How did it go?" "About how you'd expect." She laughed softly. "Did she read the letter?" "No." "Not surprising." Rebecca paused, then added something important. "We received a response." Holden leaned back in his chair. "Already?" From Bradley. Now that was interesting. What did he say? Rebecca opened the document on her end, then began reading portions aloud. The response was confident, aggressive, dismissive. Bradley claimed the notices lacked merit, claimed no violations existed, claimed future development discussions were merely hypothetical, claimed no commercial activity had occurred. Several statements were objectively false. That fact didn't concern Rebecca. False statements often helped later. The more specific the denial, the easier it became to disprove. "What now?" Holden asked. "We wait." Another answer he liked. Waiting frustrated people, especially people accustomed to immediate reactions. Meanwhile, evidence continued accumulating. 2 days later, Diane called Holden directly. "You're going to want to see this." Her tone alone was enough. 20 minutes later, Holden stood inside the management office reviewing security footage. The video displayed the main lobby, timestamp 2:43 p.m. Vanessa entered carrying the legal notice. She walked directly toward the trash receptacle near the elevators. Then, in full view of multiple cameras, she tore the documents in half. Not once, several times. Paper scattered across the bin. Then she walked away. Diane paused the video. The image froze. Holden stared at the screen. Not because he cared about the letter. Destroying paper changed nothing. What mattered was mindset. People who destroy warnings often believe warnings are the danger. They rarely notice the evidence forming around them. "There's more," Diane said. She switched to another camera. This one showed Bradley. Same afternoon, same location, talking with two unfamiliar visitors. One carried a leather portfolio. The other held architectural renderings. The conversation lasted 27 minutes. Then all three entered the elevator. Destination's 17th floor. Holden watched silently. Diane zoomed in. One of the documents briefly became visible. Just long enough. Just clear enough. The title could still be read. Executive Residence Conversion Plan. Not hypothetical, not casual, not exploratory. A plan. An actual plan. The realization settled heavily. Bradley wasn't slowing down. The legal notice had done the opposite. It had accelerated him. Some people see boundaries and stop. Others see boundaries and challenge them. Bradley clearly belonged to the second group. That evening, Holden met Rebecca and Marcus Flynn. The investigator arrived carrying a thin folder. A dangerous sign. Thin folders usually meant focused information. Focused information often mattered most. Marcus sat down, opened the folder, then slid a photograph across the table. A conference room, several prospective investors, Bradley standing near a presentation screen. Behind him appeared a digital rendering of the 17th floor. Holden recognized it instantly. The image had never been publicly released, never marketed, never authorized. Rebecca stared at the photograph, then looked up. "Where did he get that?" Nobody answered, because everyone in the room was thinking the same thing. Bradley had somehow gained access to information he should never have possessed. And if that was true, then the situation was no longer merely about unauthorized tours. Something deeper was happening. Something much more serious. And very soon, Bradley Pierce was going to make a mistake large enough to expose all of it. 3 weeks later, Bradley Pierce made the mistake Holden had been waiting for. Not because Bradley suddenly became careless, because success had made him confident. And confidence often encourages people to move too quickly. The invitation appeared first, printed on thick ivory cardstock. Elegant, professional, expensive. The kind of invitation designed to impress people before they even arrived. At the top, in gold lettering, were the words, "Private Executive Preview Event." Below that, the Whitaker Residences Collection, an exclusive opportunity. The event was scheduled for Thursday evening, 6 o'clock, 17th floor, invitation only, champagne reception included. When Marcus Flynn obtained a copy, he delivered it directly to Rebecca Sutton. Rebecca forwarded it to Holden with a single message. "He's doing it." Holden stared at the invitation for several seconds, then set his phone down. No anger, no excitement, just confirmation. Bradley had finally crossed from private deception into public representation. That distinction mattered legally. Very much. The next morning, Holden met Rebecca Marcus and Diane Keller in a conference room near the management office. The meeting lasted less than an hour. The strategy was simple. Observe, document. Wait. No interruptions. No confrontation. Not yet. Marcus would attend the event as a prospective investor. 2 additional investigators would be present. Diane would monitor access logs and security footage. Rebecca would remain available if intervention became necessary. Holden would do what he always did. Watch. The event arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. Chicago's skyline glowed beneath low clouds. Headlights reflected across wet streets. Inside, the Whitaker guests began arriving shortly before 6. The lobby quickly filled with expensive coats and polished shoes. Executives, investors, corporate housing representatives, real estate consultants, people accustomed to making large decisions. Many had never visited the building before. Others had been personally invited by Bradley. Each guest received a branded folder. Each folder contained marketing materials, floor plans, projected rental returns, concept renderings, all of it unauthorized, all of it evidence. Marcus arrived at 5:52 p.m. A tailored charcoal suit helped him blend perfectly into the crowd. Nobody questioned his presence. Nobody noticed the miniature recording device clipped inside his jacket. That was the point. At exactly 6 o'clock, the elevators began carrying visitors to the 17th floor. Inside Unit 17B, Vanessa greeted guests at the entrance. The apartment barely resembled the home she had once shared with Holden. Most personal touches were gone. Family photos, books, artwork, memories, replaced by staged furniture and decorative lighting. The space looked more like a luxury showroom than a residence. Vanessa seemed proud of it. She welcomed visitors with practiced confidence, offered drinks, answered questions, introduced Bradley. Meanwhile, Bradley operated like a man unveiling a major development project. He moved effortlessly through the crowd, shaking hands, sharing stories, making promises. The performance was impressive, dangerously impressive, because confidence often sounds convincing to people unfamiliar with the facts. By 6:30 p.m., nearly 20 guests occupied the apartment. Several conversations occurred simultaneously. Marcus listened carefully. So did the other investigators. Every statement mattered. Every claim mattered, especially when recorded. Bradley eventually gathered everyone near the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights created a dramatic backdrop. Intentional. Everything about the evening was intentional. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley began. The room quieted. "We're excited to offer a rare opportunity." Marcus immediately noticed the wording. "We're," not I. Not a hypothetical proposal. A direct representation. Exactly what Rebecca had hoped for. Bradley continued. "The Whitaker collection represents one of the most exciting luxury housing opportunities currently available in River North." Several guests nodded. Others reviewed their folders. No one questioned the claim. Why would they? The materials looked legitimate. The setting looked legitimate. Bradley sounded legitimate. That's how fraud often works. Not through obvious lies, through believable ones. Over the next 20 minutes, Bradley outlined future plans: executive residences, corporate housing, premium lease packages, projected occupancy rates, projected revenue, projected expansion opportunities. He spoke confidently about units beyond 17 billion. Units he had never owned. Units he had no authority to market. Units belonging entirely to Holden Long. The deeper the presentation went, the stronger the evidence became. Marcus quietly took notes. One investigator recorded audio. Another documented attendee interactions. Meanwhile, Diane monitored everything from downstairs. Access logs, security cameras, visitor records. Every piece of information was being preserved, exactly as planned. At 7:05 p.m., Bradley unveiled his centerpiece, a large digital rendering displayed on a portable monitor. The image showed the entire 17th floor redesigned into luxury executive housing. New finishes, new amenities, private lounges, premium workspaces, corporate suites. The guests appeared impressed. Several began asking investment questions. This was what Bradley wanted: momentum, excitement, commitment. One investor stepped forward, a man named Richard Kane, corporate relocation specialist, experienced, careful. "What's the ownership structure?" The room became quiet. Marcus immediately paid attention. Ownership questions mattered. Bradley smiled. The practiced smile appeared again. "We have strong control of the floor." Marcus wrote the sentence down, word for word. Bradley continued. "Operational authority is already in place." Another note, another statement, another problem, because neither claim was true. Several attendees appeared reassured. Questions continued. Bradley answered confidently, too confidently. The more comfortable he became, the more specific his claims grew. Specificity creates evidence. That was why Holden had waited. People often expose themselves when they believe they've already won. By 7:20 p.m., deposits were being discussed openly. Not suggested, discussed. Potential reservation opportunities, priority access, future lease preferences. The operation had evolved far beyond casual conversations. Money was now part of the presentation. Real money. That changed everything. Back downstairs, Rebecca reviewed updates arriving in real time. Every few minutes, Marcus forwarded information. Quotes, photographs, recordings. The evidence pile grew larger. Then Rebecca sent a message. One sentence. "Ready when you are." Holden looked at the screen, then at the elevator. For weeks, he had remained invisible, allowing Bradley to speak, allowing Bradley to build, allowing Bradley to create the very evidence now surrounding him. The time for observation was ending. The time for introduction had arrived. At 7:35 p.m., Holden stepped into the service elevator. Not the public one. The restricted elevator connected to portions of the floor most residents never accessed. The same areas Bradley had become strangely interested in. The ride lasted less than 30 seconds. The elevator climbed smoothly, quietly, deliberately, much like Holden himself. When the doors opened, he stepped into a service corridor. Voices echoed nearby. Laughter, conversation, champagne glasses. The event remained in full swing. Holden adjusted his jacket. Not expensive, not fashionable. The same practical jacket he had worn for years. The same one Vanessa once complained about. The same one Bradley had privately mocked. Then he walked toward the gathering. Inside Unit 17B, Bradley was describing future expansion opportunities. Vanessa stood beside him, smiling, confident, certain. The audience remained engaged. Nobody noticed Holden at first. Why would they? Most of them had never met him. To them, he looked like exactly what Bradley had always implied: a maintenance employee, a facilities manager, someone irrelevant. The irony would have been amusing under different circumstances. Marcus noticed him immediately, then Rebecca's investigators, then Diane through the security feed. The moment had arrived. Bradley continued speaking, unaware. Vanessa laughed at something a guest said. Unaware. Several investors reviewed floor plans. Unaware. Holden reached the edge of the crowd and stopped. No announcement, no dramatic entrance, no interruption, just calm observation. Eventually, one guest noticed him, then another, then another. Conversation slowed, heads turned, The shift moved gradually through the room, like a ripple crossing water. Finally, Bradley looked up. His smile remained. At first, then confusion appeared, then irritation, then something else. Concern. Because for the first time all evening, Holden wasn't standing outside the story. He was standing directly inside it. And within the next few minutes, everyone in that room was about to learn exactly who he was. The room fell silent, one conversation at a time. Not instantly. Gradually. A few guests stopped speaking. Then others noticed. Then the attention spread. Within seconds, nearly every person inside Unit 17B was looking toward the doorway, looking at Holden Long. Holden remained where he was, hands relaxed, expression neutral, no dramatic announcement, no attempt to seize attention. He simply stood there. That calmness seemed to irritate Bradley immediately. The broker recovered quickly, or at least tried to. A practiced smile returned to his face, the same smile he used whenever circumstances became uncomfortable. "Holden." Several guests glanced between them, trying to understand the connection. Bradley laughed lightly. "Didn't know we were expecting maintenance tonight." A few people chuckled politely, others didn't. Marcus Flynn noticed something important. The laughter sounded uncertain, not confident. People sensed tension, and tension makes audiences pay attention. Holden said nothing. The silence forced Bradley to continue. A mistake. Most mistakes begin that way. People become uncomfortable and start talking too much. Bradley stepped forward, champagne glass in hand. "We're in the middle of a presentation." His tone remained friendly, on the surface. Underneath, irritation was beginning to show. Holden nodded once. "I noticed." The answer was simple, nothing more. Again, the response denied Bradley the confrontation he seemed to want. Vanessa stepped forward next. Her expression tightened. "What are you doing here?" The question echoed through the apartment. Guests listened carefully. Nobody touched their drinks. Nobody resumed their conversations. Everyone sensed something important was happening. Holden looked at Vanessa. For a brief moment, memories crossed his mind. 8 years, shared holidays, shared routines, shared plans. Then the thoughts disappeared. Facts mattered now, not memories. "I came to see the presentation." Vanessa laughed. The sound felt forced. "You're not invited." Several people shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere had changed. The evening no longer felt like an exclusive investment event. Now it felt like a dispute nobody fully understood. Bradley raised a hand, trying to regain control. "It's okay." He turned toward the audience. "Holden used to live here." Used to. Interesting choice of words. Bradley loved framing narratives, creating impressions, building assumptions. The problem was that assumptions eventually collide with reality, and reality had just stepped into the room. Bradley smiled again. "You know how breakups go." A few guests nodded politely. Still, nobody understood why Holden seemed so calm. If he had been an angry ex-boyfriend, the scene would have made sense. If he had been jealous, emotional, bitter, or unstable, the story would have been easy. But Holden wasn't behaving like any of those things. That inconsistency created questions. Questions made people cautious, especially investors. Bradley apparently sensed the shift, so he decided to push harder. Another mistake. "You really should move on, Holden." Silence. "You don't live here anymore." Silence. Vanessa folded her arms. "Bradley's right." There was confidence in her voice, the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided, the confidence of someone who thought she understood the entire situation. Neither she nor Bradley noticed several guests beginning to exchange glances. Smart investors pay attention to behavior, and Holden's behavior didn't match the role being assigned to him. Then Bradley made the biggest mistake of the evening. He laughed. Not naturally, performatively, for the audience. The laugh said, "This man doesn't matter." The room should ignore him. Unfortunately for Bradley, reality often reacts poorly to that strategy. "What exactly are you supposed to be doing here?" Bradley asked. The question hung in the air. Holden finally took a few steps forward. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to enter the center of the room. The movement immediately captured everyone's attention. Even Bradley stopped smiling. Holden looked around the apartment. The brochures, the guests, the renderings, the folders, the displays, the evidence. Weeks of preparation had produced an impressive presentation. Too bad it was built on a lie. Then Holden spoke. His voice remained calm, measured, professional, the way someone speaks when facts are sufficient. "I wanted to hear how the 17th floor was being marketed." A subtle shift moved through the room. Several guests frowned. One investor lowered his brochure. Bradley crossed his arms. "What does that mean?" Holden looked directly at him. "It means you've been discussing property interests you don't own." The silence became heavier. Vanessa immediately stepped in. "That's ridiculous." Holden ignored the interruption. Not out of disrespect, because he had learned long ago that arguments rarely produce clarity. Evidence does. Bradley laughed again. This time the sound felt less convincing. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Marcus noticed two investors exchange a glance. The atmosphere was changing rapidly. Confidence was being replaced by uncertainty, exactly the opposite of what Bradley wanted. Then Holden reached inside his jacket. Several guests stiffened slightly. Instead of producing anything dramatic, he removed a slim black folder. Professional, ordinary, dangerous, because documents often are. He handed the folder to a woman standing nearby. Corporate relocation executive. The same woman who had previously asked questions about ownership. "Please." The woman looked confused, then opened the folder. Inside were certified ownership records, corporate filings, property documents, official state registrations, the kind of paperwork impossible to dismiss. Her eyes moved quickly across the first page, then the second, then the third. Her expression changed. Immediately. People noticed. One investor stepped closer, then another. Soon several guests were reviewing copies. No one spoke. They simply read. And reading has a strange effect on confidence, especially false confidence. Bradley's smile disappeared. Vanessa looked from face to face. Confusion appeared. For the first time all evening, uncertainty entered her expression. "What is that?" she asked. Nobody answered immediately. The documents spoke for themselves. Eventually, the relocation executive looked up. Her voice sounded careful, professional, measured. "Long Urban Holdings LLC owns the entire 17th floor." The room froze. Complete silence. No music, no conversations, no laughter, just stillness. Bradley stared at her, then at Holden, then back at the documents, as though reality had suddenly become negotiable. It wasn't. The woman continued. "Managing member." She looked down again, then back up. "Holden Long." The sentence landed like a hammer. Several investors immediately lowered their brochures. Others began flipping through pages faster, verifying, checking, confirming. Because smart people trust documents more than presentations. The atmosphere transformed completely. Only minutes earlier, Bradley had controlled the room. Now the room was questioning everything. Every claim, every promise, every projection, every statement. Vanessa looked directly at Holden. The realization arrived slowly, painfully. She had spent years believing she knew exactly who he was. Now, strangers were learning more about him in 30 seconds than she had learned in 8 years. Bradley's face had gone pale. He recovered enough to speak. Barely. "That doesn't prove anything." A dangerous sentence, because it invited more proof, and Holden had brought plenty. Before Holden could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Rebecca Sutton. She stepped through the doorway carrying a leather briefcase. Elegant, composed, entirely expected by Holden, completely unexpected by everyone else. Several guests turned toward her. Rebecca walked directly into the center of the room, then placed her briefcase on a nearby table. "Actually," she said calmly, "it proves quite a lot." Bradley's expression tightened. The attorney opened her briefcase, removed several files, then looked directly at him. "Mr. Pierce?" The title sounded formal, deliberate, dangerous. "I represent Long Urban Holdings." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Rebecca placed a stack of documents on the table, then another, then another. Deposit receipts, visitor records, marketing materials, printed evidence, weeks of evidence. And for the first time all evening, Bradley Pierce looked like a man who finally understood he might be in serious trouble. Nobody reached for the champagne anymore. The glasses remained untouched on side tables and kitchen counters. The excitement that had filled Unit 17B 30 minutes earlier was gone. In its place stood something far more dangerous. Doubt. For investors, doubt spreads quickly. For salesmen, it is poison. Bradley Pierce understood that immediately, which was why he spoke before Rebecca Sutton could. "This is ridiculous." His voice sounded louder than before. Not stronger, just louder. "There is a difference." Rebecca calmly organized the documents on the table. "No, Mr. Pierce." She looked directly at him. "It isn't." The attorney's composure contrasted sharply with Bradley's growing agitation. Investors noticed. They always notice. Confidence backed by evidence looks different from confidence backed by ego. One survives pressure, the other doesn't. Bradley pointed toward Holden. "So what?" He laughed. Again, but now the laughter sounded strained. "He owns property." Nobody responded, because ownership wasn't the issue. Everyone in the room understood that. Even Bradley. Especially Bradley. Rebecca opened the first file. "Let's start with something simple." She removed a document, then placed it in front of several guests. A deposit receipt, the same one that had started everything. "This reservation payment was accepted on March 12th. Silence. Rebecca turned another page. "Here's another." Then another. Then another. The stack continued growing. The investors watched carefully. Dates, names, amounts, signatures, records, evidence, facts. The room no longer resembled a luxury showcase. It resembled an audit. Bradley's jaw tightened. Vanessa stood frozen beside him. Holden observed quietly. He wasn't enjoying the moment. Contrary to what many people might assume, victory rarely feels exciting when it involves people you once cared about. What Holden felt was something simpler. Confirmation. The truth was finally standing in the open. Nothing more. Nothing less. One investor spoke first. Richard Kane, the relocation executive. "How many deposits are we talking about?" Rebecca glanced at her notes. "Currently documented." She looked up. 11. A ripple moved through the room. Several attendees exchanged glances. 11. Not one misunderstanding. Not one isolated incident. 11 separate transactions. That changed perceptions immediately. Bradley's face darkened. "Those weren't leases." Rebecca nodded. "Correct." The answer surprised him. For a second, he looked relieved. Then she continued. "They were reservation payments accepted for property opportunities you had no legal authority to market." The relief vanished. Several people actually stepped away from Bradley. Only slightly. A few inches. Enough to notice. Humans instinctively create distance from risk. The behavior was almost unconscious. Vanessa noticed it too. and for the first time genuine concern appeared in her expression. Not anger, concern, a dangerous shift, because concern often arrives when denial begins to crack. Bradley tried another strategy. Attack. It's all hypothetical. Rebecca smiled, not mockingly, professionally. The marketing materials would disagree. She produced the brochures, dozens of copies, collected from guests, collected from previous presentations, collected from investigation work. The evidence covered the table: glossy paper, professional graphics, detailed floor plans, projected rental income, projected occupancy rates, future expansion opportunities, everything carefully designed, everything unauthorized. One investor slowly flipped through a brochure, then looked up. "You printed all this?" Bradley hesitated, only briefly. But people noticed. They always notice hesitation, especially after certainty. "We were exploring possibilities." Rebecca opened another folder. "This brochure advertises executive residences as a coming development." She turned a page. "It includes projected completion dates." Another page. "Projected rental terms." Another page. "Priority reservation opportunities." She closed the brochure. "That isn't exploration." Nobody argued. Even Bradley didn't, because some documents are impossible to explain away. Meanwhile, Holden watched Vanessa. Not Bradley. Vanessa. Her attention remained fixed on the table. The evidence, the ownership documents, the reservation records. The realization was spreading across her face piece by piece, like someone slowly assembling a puzzle, a painful puzzle, one she had unknowingly helped create. Then came the emails. Marcus Flynn handed Rebecca another file. The private investigator remained near the back of the room. Quiet, invisible, effective. Rebecca removed printed communications. Several attendees leaned forward. The messages revealed coordination, investor meetings, property discussions, future occupancy plans, marketing efforts. Most importantly, repeated references to control. Control. Bradley never possessed. One sentence appeared multiple times. "We already have operational authority." The same phrase used during presentations. The same phrase used during private communications. The same phrase used to secure deposits. The repetition mattered. Repeated claims demonstrate intent. Intent matters in court. Intent matters in investigations. Intent matters everywhere. Bradley finally snapped. "Everybody's acting like I committed a crime." The room remained silent. Nobody rushed to defend him. That silence was revealing. Very revealing. Richard Kane folded his brochure. "When exactly were you planning to tell people you didn't own any of this?" The question landed heavily. Bradley didn't answer. Not immediately, because there wasn't a good answer. Several seconds passed. Then another investor spoke, a woman from a corporate housing group. "Did you tell any of us who actually owned the floor?" No answer. Another question. Another silence. The momentum had completely shifted. Only an hour earlier, Bradley controlled the room. Now the room controlled him, and questions kept coming, the most dangerous kind. Specific questions. Questions requiring facts. Questions impossible to charm away. Vanessa finally looked at Holden. "What is all this?" Her voice sounded quieter than before, not defensive, confused. Holden considered the question, because the answer mattered. "It means the floor belongs to Long Urban Holdings." She stared at him. "I know that now." Holden nodded. "It means the business decisions belong to Long Urban Holdings too." Another realization appeared, slowly, painfully. Vanessa looked around the room, at the guests, the brochures, the documents, then at Bradley. Something in her expression changed, not completely, but enough. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Only questions remained. Bradley noticed and reacted badly, very badly. People under pressure reveal character. That truth never fails. "This isn't my fault." The sentence escaped before he could stop it. Several heads turned. Vanessa blinked. "What?" Bradley gestured toward her. "You were involved too." The room became even quieter. Holden watched carefully, because this was the first time Bradley had shifted blame. People usually do that when they realize defense isn't working. Vanessa stared at him. "I was involved." Bradley spoke quickly, almost desperately. "You hosted the events. You invited people. You stood beside me during presentations." Each sentence made things worse, because responsibility shared publicly often sounds very different from responsibility discussed privately. Vanessa's face hardened. The shock gave way to anger. Not toward Holden, toward Bradley, for the first time in months, maybe years. She seemed to see him clearly. The timing was unfortunate, and late, very late. Rebecca interrupted before the argument escalated. Whether Ms. Hart understood the legal situation is a separate question. The distinction mattered, a lot. Everyone in the room understood that, including Vanessa, including Bradley, especially Bradley. Then another development arrived. Diane Keller stepped into the apartment. She approached Rebecca quietly, whispered something. Rebecca listened, then nodded. Her expression didn't change, but Holden noticed. He always noticed. The attorney turned toward the room. "We've also received confirmation that a prospective client has filed a formal complaint regarding transferred reservation funds." The sentence struck like lightning. Several guests visibly reacted. Bradley's face lost color. Real color. Not metaphorical, actual color. The complaint changed everything. Because complaints create records. Records create investigations. Investigations create consequences. Richard Kane slowly placed his brochure on the table. "I think I'm leaving." Others followed, one by one. Guests gathered coats, collected belongings, moved toward the exit. Not dramatically, quietly, professionally. The event was over. The illusion was over. And Bradley knew it. Vanessa knew it. Everyone knew it. The final blow arrived moments later. The elevator doors opened. 2 uniformed Chicago police officers stepped into the hallway outside Unit 17B. Not because arrests were coming. Not yet. Because a financial complaint involving reservation payments had already triggered preliminary inquiries. Nothing more. Nothing less. But the symbolism was devastating. Bradley stared toward the doorway, then toward the evidence-covered table, then toward the guests leaving his event. The empire he had built inside his own imagination was collapsing. And for the first time since this entire situation began, Holden believed Bradley finally understood how serious things had become. The problem for Bradley was simple. This was no longer a private dispute, no longer a relationship issue, no longer a marketing problem. Now it was becoming a legal one. And legal problems tend to grow when the documents start talking. 3 weeks after the failed showcase event, the case arrived at the Cook County Circuit Court. The courthouse stood near Daly Plaza, surrounded by steel towers and government buildings that had witnessed thousands of disputes. Some involved millions of dollars. Others involved broken promises. This case contained both. On the morning of the hearing, Holden Long arrived 15 minutes early. Not because he was nervous, because he disliked rushing. The habit had followed him for years. He parked 3 blocks away, walked through the security checkpoint, and entered the courthouse carrying a single leather folder. No entourage, no dramatic entrance, no attempt to project power, the same quiet approach he brought everywhere. Rebecca Sutton was already waiting outside courtroom 5B. She stood beside a rolling case filled with documents, far more documents than Holden carried, That was intentional. Lawyers carry evidence. Clients carry patience. At least the smart ones do. "Morning," Rebecca said. "Morning." She glanced toward the hallway. "They're here." Holden followed her gaze. Vanessa sat on a wooden bench near the far wall. Her posture looked different, smaller somehow, less certain. The confidence that had surrounded her during Bradley's presentations had faded noticeably. Bradley sat beside her, or rather, he occupied the seat beside her. The distance between them seemed larger than the physical space separating them. Neither appeared particularly comfortable. Neither appeared particularly united. That interested Holden, not because he cared about their relationship, because pressure reveals alliances. Strong alliances survive. Weak ones fracture. This one looked fractured already. A man in a navy suit approached Rebecca. Vanessa's attorney, Thomas Redford, experienced, professional, well regarded in local property disputes. The two attorneys shook hands, exchanged brief pleasantries, then returned to their respective sides. The hearing was scheduled to address Vanessa's emergency petition, specifically her claim that Holden had effectively gifted Unit 17B to her following the breakup. A difficult argument, not impossible, but difficult, especially when documentation existed. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone entered. The courtroom itself was smaller than most television dramas would suggest. No packed gallery, no dramatic spectators, just attorneys, parties, court staff, the judge. Reality tends to be less theatrical than fiction, and far more important. Judge Robert Callahan entered precisely on time, 63 years old, 3 decades on the bench, known for efficiency, known for preparation, known for having very little patience for nonsense. The hearing began. Procedural matters came first. Appearances, introductions, administrative details. Then Judge Callahan turned toward Vanessa's attorney. "Mr. Redford." The attorney stood. "Your Honor." "Proceed." Redford approached confidently. He was skilled. Holden recognized that immediately. The man knew how to build a narrative. And narrative mattered, even in court, especially in court. For nearly 20 minutes, Redford described the relationship. 8 years together. Shared residence. Shared life. Shared expectations. He painted a picture of commitment, stability, reliance. Then he gradually shifted toward the apartment. Vanessa's belief that she would remain there. Her understanding of the arrangement. Her reliance on Holden's statements following the breakup. The presentation was polished, thoughtful, persuasive. Several times, Holden noticed Vanessa looking down, avoiding eye contact. Not with him, with the documents. Interesting. Redford eventually reached his conclusion. "Your Honor, Ms. Hart reasonably believed the residence had been transferred to her." The judge made a note, then looked toward Rebecca. "Ms. Sutton." Rebecca stood. Unlike Redford, she carried no theatrical energy. No sweeping language, no emotional framing. She simply walked to the podium carrying a binder, then opened it. "Your Honor." The contrast became immediately apparent. Redford had told a story. Rebecca began presenting records. One approach appeals to emotion. The other appeals to reality. Both matter. Reality usually matters more. Rebecca introduced the first exhibit, the temporary occupancy agreement, a document Holden had requested months earlier, long before any lawsuit existed, long before Bradley, long before the showcase event. The judge reviewed the paperwork carefully. The courtroom grew quiet. Rebecca waited. No interruption, no explanation. The document spoke for itself. Eventually, Judge Callahan looked up. This agreement was signed. "Yes, Your Honor." "By both parties?" "Yes." The judge continued reading. Holden watched Vanessa. Her expression changed slightly. The occupancy agreement wasn't complicated. It granted permission, temporary occupancy, nothing more. No ownership transfer, no gift, no conveyance, no change in title, just permission. The distinction mattered enormously. Judge Callahan turned another page, then another. Finally, he looked toward Redford. Was this document disclosed in the petition? A pause, not a long one, long enough. Not specifically, Your Honor. The judge made another note. The sound of the pen seemed unusually loud. Rebecca continued. Next came property records, corporate filings, ownership structures, management authority, operating agreements. Each document reinforced the same point. Holden Long controlled Long Urban Holdings. Long Urban Holdings controlled the 17th floor. Not partially, entirely. Meanwhile, Bradley appeared increasingly uncomfortable. The hearing technically wasn't about him, yet his name continued appearing. Visitor logs, marketing materials, reservation records, unauthorized representations. Every path eventually led back to him. The judge noticed. Of course he noticed. Judges notice patterns for a living. Around mid-morning, Redford attempted a different strategy. He argued reasonable expectation, reliance, relationship history, implied promises. The arguments weren't absurd. They simply lacked documentation. Rebecca responded with documents, again and again and again. Eventually, the difference became impossible to ignore. One side offered interpretations. The other offered records. Holden appreciated that, not because he enjoyed seeing Vanessa lose ground, because facts simplified everything. Facts remove confusion. Facts remove performance. Facts reduce complicated situations to what actually happened. Nothing more, nothing less. Near noon, Judge Callahan requested a short recess. The parties exited into the hallway. Reporters weren't present. The case wasn't important enough, which suited Holden perfectly. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca reviewed notes. "Good morning." Holden nodded. "You expected anything different?" No. Neither had she. The evidence was too strong. The occupancy agreement alone had shifted the hearing dramatically. Still, Holden noticed something unusual. Vanessa remained seated alone near a window. Bradley was nowhere nearby. Not unusual anymore. The distance between them had continued growing. Several times during the hearing, Bradley had appeared irritated whenever his name surfaced. Several times, Vanessa had looked toward him, seeking reassurance, finding none. The pattern repeated itself. Pressure reveals character. Always. The recess ended. Everyone returned inside. Judge Callahan resumed proceedings. Then came the moment neither attorney had fully anticipated. The judge looked directly at Rebecca. "I'd like to review the complete ownership records." The request wasn't hostile, nor was it routine. It was important. Very important. Rebecca nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Honor." The judge continued. "The entire title packet." A brief silence followed. Holden understood what the request meant. The court was moving beyond the apartment, beyond occupancy, beyond relationship arguments, toward the larger question: who actually owned what? And once that question received a formal answer, many other questions would receive answers too. Rebecca began organizing additional files, several binders, several years of records, property transfers, ownership acquisitions, corporate filings, everything. Judge Callahan glanced toward the stack, then back toward the parties. "We'll reconvene after review." The gavel struck softly. Not dramatic, not loud, yet the sound seemed to echo through the room, because everyone understood what came next. The court was about to examine the very documents Vanessa had never bothered to examine during 8 years with Holden, and those documents were about to change the entire case. The courthouse hallway felt colder after lunch, not in temperature, in silence. People spoke less when they knew something important was coming. Inside courtroom 5B, the clerk laid out the full title packet across the table in front of Judge Callahan. It was thicker than expected. 3 binders, stamped, indexed, certified. Rebecca Sutton stood ready, hands folded, waiting for the judge to begin. Redford sat beside Vanessa, no longer speaking. Bradley had stopped trying to project confidence altogether. That shift alone told Holden everything he needed to know. Confidence disappears quickly when paperwork arrives. Judge Callahan adjusted his glasses. Let's go through ownership clearly. He opened the first binder. The first page displayed the corporate structure. Long Urban Holdings, LLC. Filed in Delaware. Registered operations in Illinois. The judge traced the structure line by line, then paused. Managing member. Rebecca stood. Holden Long, Your Honor. A pen moved across paper. Noted. The judge turned another page, then another. The courtroom remained still. No one interrupted. No one moved. The documents did all the speaking. Property acquisition records followed. Unit 17A, Unit 17B, Unit 17C, Unit 17D, Unit 17E, Unit 17F, and then the shared infrastructure rights, elevator access agreements, mechanical systems, storage corridors, entire sections of the 17th floor unified under one ownership structure. The judge leaned back slightly, then looked up. This is the entire floor. Rebecca nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. A long silence followed. Not dramatic, just heavy. Vanessa shifted in her seat. For the first time since the hearing began, she looked directly at Holden. Not angrily, not confidently, differently, like someone seeing a familiar object suddenly rearranged in a new light. Bradley spoke under his breath. That's not possible. But the documents didn't care what he believed. Judge Callahan continued reading, then stopped at a section marked Capital Improvements. He raised an eyebrow. These renovations were funded by the same entity. Yes, and controlled by Mr. Long, yes. The judge closed the binder slightly, then reopened it, carefully, like someone verifying something that shouldn't be surprising but was. He turned to another section. Access logs, security permissions, service corridor entries. That detail caught his attention longer than the others. He looked up. Explained the service corridor access attempts. Rebecca nodded and motioned toward Marcus Flynn. Marcus stood quietly. Your Honor, multiple unauthorized inquiries were made regarding restricted infrastructure on the 17th floor. He placed a printed log on the table. The judge reviewed it, then looked at Bradley. You were attempting access. Bradley hesitated. That hesitation was enough. I was exploring development feasibility. A careful answer, but not a legal one. The judge wrote something down, then turned another page. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained frozen, not reacting, not speaking, just absorbing. The courtroom was no longer a debate. It was an audit, a full reconstruction of reality. Judge Callahan finally leaned forward. Mr. Redford, your argument is that your client believed she had ownership rights. Redford stood. Yes, Your Honor. The judge tapped the document. Where is the ownership transfer silence? Redford flipped through his own papers. Faster than before, then slower, then stopped. There is no formal transfer document. The judge nodded once, as if confirming something already understood. Then what exactly was transferred, Redford didn't answer immediately. Because there was nothing to say, Vanessa spoke for the first time in the courtroom. Her voice was small. But he said I could stay. All eyes shifted to her. The judge didn't interrupt. Rebecca didn't interrupt. Even Holden didn't. Because this part mattered. Redford leaned toward her slightly. Ms. Hart. But Vanessa continued anyway. He told me I could keep it. Her eyes moved toward Holden. Not accusing, not confident, searching. Holden answered calmly. You could stay there. A pause. Not own it. The difference hung in the air. Simple words, heavy meaning. Judge Callahan closed the binder fully, then spoke. Temporary occupancy does not constitute transfer of ownership. His tone wasn't harsh. It was final. He continued reviewing notes, then looked up again. There is no evidence of a property gift. Another pause. There is no evidence of transfer intent. The words landed cleanly. No ambiguity. No interpretation. Just conclusion. Vanessa slowly lowered her gaze. Bradley shifted in his seat. For the first time, he didn't look like a man evaluating opportunity. He looked like a man calculating escape routes. Judge Callahan continued. However, everyone looked up again. The word, however, always mattered in court. However, there appears to be sufficient evidence of unauthorized marketing activity tied to this property. Now the focus shifted. Bradley straightened slightly. Rebecca immediately placed additional documents on the table. The judge examined them. Printed brochures, digital renderings, email chains, payment confirmations, reservation lists. The pattern reappeared clearly. Not isolated incidents. A structured operation. The judge looked directly at Bradley. Who authorized these materials? Bradley opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. We were in early-stage discussions. Rebecca spoke immediately. With whom? Silence. Bradley didn't answer. Because the answer didn't exist, the judge made another note, then turned toward Holden. You were aware of these activities. I became aware after they began. Did you approve any of them? No. The simplicity of the answer mattered. The judge nodded, then leaned back again. For the first time, he looked slightly tired. Not of the case, of how clear it had become. He spoke slowly. This court finds no legal basis for the claim of ownership transfer to Ms. Hart. Vanessa's breath caught slightly. The judge continued. Occupancy remains governed by the temporary agreement. Then he turned a page. Mr. Long retains full ownership of the 17th floor through Long Urban Holdings, LLC. A final pause. Effective immediately, any unauthorized commercial representation of the property must cease. The gavel came down. Not loud, not theatrical, just final. Court adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room began to shift. Attorneys gathered papers. Court staff reset folders. People stood slowly, as if leaving something heavier than they had entered with. Vanessa remained seated. Bradley stood first. He adjusted his jacket, looked toward the exit, then toward Holden. No words, just calculation. Then he left. Fast. Redford followed shortly after speaking quietly to Vanessa, but she didn't respond. She stayed still, watching the empty space in front of her. Eventually, Rebecca approached Holden. It's done. Holden nodded. Yes, no celebration, no satisfaction, just closure. They exited the courtroom together. Outside Chicago, traffic moved as usual, unaware that a quiet legal shift had just ended a complicated illusion. Marcus stood near the courthouse steps. He gave a small nod. Clean ruling, Rebecca replied. Clean case. Holden looked out toward the city. The same buildings, the same streets. Nothing had changed physically, but something had ended. Behind them, Vanessa finally walked out of the courthouse, alone. For the first time since this entire situation began, she no longer had Bradley beside her. She paused briefly at the top of the steps, looked down, then across the street, then at Holden. But Holden didn't move toward her, not because of anger, not because of pride, because there was nothing left to resolve. Some conversations end in arguments. Others end in silence. This one had ended in documents. And documents once spoken in court rarely leave room for anything else. Vanessa eventually walked away. Bradley was already gone, and Holden Long stood still for a moment longer before turning back toward the city he quietly owned more of than almost anyone ever realized. The days after the court ruling didn't feel dramatic. They felt empty. Not for Holden Long, for everyone else involved. Bradley Pierce disappeared first, not physically at first, financially, professionally, then socially. Within 48 hours of the ruling, Marcus Flynn confirmed that Bradley's corporate accounts tied to the Whitaker presentations had been frozen pending investigation. The reservation deposits, now formally flagged as unauthorized transactions, were placed under legal review. 3 of the prospective investors withdrew complaints immediately. The remaining clients demanded refunds. Bradley's response was silence, then distance, then absence. By the end of the week, his name no longer appeared in any communication threads tied to the Whitaker. It was as if he had never controlled the narrative at all. But Holden knew better. People like Bradley didn't vanish. They recalibrated. The real consequence was slower. He would carry the documentation forward with him for years, and every time he tried to rebuild authority, someone would eventually ask the same question: what happened at the Whitaker? Vanessa Hart did not disappear. She stayed, at least physically, but something in her changed after the ruling. She returned to Unit 17B the night after the court decision. Holden saw her only once that day, from the service corridor window. She stood alone in the apartment. No music, no guests, no Bradley, just silence. She walked slowly from room to room as if measuring something that no longer belonged to her emotionally, even if she still occupied it legally. Holden didn't interrupt. He didn't approach. He simply observed. Then he left. The legal ruling had already defined the boundaries. Everything beyond that was personal, and Holden no longer mixed the two. 3 days later, Vanessa sent a message. It was short. "We need to talk." Holden replied with 2 words. "About what?" No response came immediately. That was expected. When people lose narrative control, they often struggle to define what remains worth discussing. The conversation eventually happened in the building lobby, not upstairs, not in Unit 17B. Neutral ground. Diane Keller was present behind the front desk, though she pretended not to listen. Vanessa arrived first. Holden arrived 2 minutes later. She looked different, not physically, structurally, like someone who had been forced to remove something heavy from their identity. Her confidence was gone, but something else had replaced it. Awareness. "I didn't know," she said immediately. Holden nodded once. "I know." That response confused her. "You know I didn't know. I know you didn't understand the structure." A pause. That distinction mattered. Not knowing and not understanding. They were not the same thing. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "I thought it was just an apartment." Holden didn't respond right away. He looked at the glass doors behind her, at the city outside, at the building he had spent years quietly assembling ownership of while living inside it unnoticed. "It was never just an apartment," he said finally. That sentence landed quietly, but firmly. Vanessa looked down. "I trusted him," she said. Holden didn't ask who. There was no need. "I trusted what I saw," she added. Another pause. Holden nodded again. That part he understood. People trust what they can measure. Cars, clothes, words, presence. Not documents they never read. Not systems they never questioned. Vanessa continued. "He told me it was his project." Holden finally looked at her. "That's the difference." Her eyes lifted slightly. "What is he told you a story?" Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just final. Vanessa shifted her weight. "I lost everything because of that story." Holden corrected her gently. "You lost assumptions. That distinction mattered too. Assumptions are not assets, they are interpretations, and interpretations can collapse instantly when confronted with records. Vanessa let that sink in. Then she asked something quieter. Where do I go from here? Holden considered the question. Not emotionally. Practically. I don't control that decision. That was true. The court had already defined her occupancy terms. She could remain temporarily, or she could leave. But either way, the narrative she had been living inside was gone. Vanessa nodded slowly, then looked around the lobby. This place feels different now. Holden followed her gaze. It didn't change. She looked back at him. Then I did. That was the first completely honest statement she had made since everything began. Holden acknowledged it with a small nod. Yes. Diane quietly lowered her head behind the desk, pretending to adjust paperwork. But she was listening. She always listened. Vanessa hesitated, then spoke again. Is he going to jail? She meant Bradley. Holden understood immediately. I don't know, he said. That depends on what investigators find. Vanessa absorbed that, then nodded again, as if the answer confirmed something she already suspected. She looked at Holden one last time. I don't know who you are anymore. Holden didn't react, because that statement wasn't new. It was just delayed recognition. You never really did, he said calmly. There was no accusation in his voice, only fact. Vanessa flinched slightly, but didn't argue. Instead, she turned toward the elevator, then stopped. Without looking back, she said quietly, I thought I was building a better life. Holden replied after a short pause. You were building a different one. That was all. She left. The elevator doors closed. The lobby returned to silence. Diane finally looked up. She's going to struggle with this, she said. Holden nodded. Yes, and him. Another pause. Bradley. Yes, he already is. That was the end of the conversation, but not the end of the consequences. Over the next 2 weeks, Holden returned to his normal routine. Morning inspections, property reviews, legal coordination, maintenance planning. The 17th floor stabilized quickly. Security protocols were tightened. Access logs were cleaned and restructured. Unauthorized marketing channels were shut down completely. The Whitaker returned to what it had always been under Holden's ownership. Quiet, controlled, functional. But something had shifted permanently. Not in the building, in perception. Residents now knew who controlled it, even if they never said it aloud. One afternoon, Rebecca Sutton visited Holden's office with final paperwork. The court compliance order is complete, she said. Holden signed without reading it. Rebecca noticed. You trust it that much? Holden looked up. I trust what's already been proven. She smiled slightly. That's rare. Not really, Holden replied. It just looks that way when people don't pay attention early enough. Rebecca closed the folder, then paused. You're going to leave 17B empty for a while. Holden nodded. Yes. Sentimental, no. A beat. Practical. He looked out the window. The city moved below, unaware of ownership structures, unaware of legal filings, unaware of how quietly control had always existed above its surface. People remember spaces differently than they remember facts, Holden added. Rebecca considered that, then nodded once. I've seen that. Later that week, Marcus Flynn sent one final report. Bradley Pierce had been formally investigated for unauthorized solicitation of investment funds. No arrest yet, but active inquiry. Vanessa Hart was listed only as a cooperating witness, not a suspect, not a target, just someone who had been present inside a structure she didn't understand. Marcus's final line in the report was simple. He built confidence without control. Holden read that twice, then closed the file. Outside, Chicago continued moving. Inside the Whitaker, the 17th floor remained exactly as it had been designed, but now it was understood. And once something is understood, it can no longer be mistaken for something else again. Not by anyone. Not anymore. The first sign that something was missing came quietly, not through alarm, not through damage, through absence. Holden Long noticed it on a routine inspection of the service corridor adjoining the 17th floor. The corridor itself had been sealed and resecured weeks earlier. Access logs showed no authorized entry. Surveillance confirmed no breaches. Everything appeared intact. But Holden had learned long ago that intact and untouched were not the same thing. He stood in front of the locked storage cabinet at the far end of the corridor. It was a simple steel unit, industrial grade, used for archived building records, spare access keys, and older maintenance documentation that predated digital systems. Holden inserted his key, turned it, opened the cabinet, then stopped. For half a second, nothing registered. Then the absence became clear. A small leather-bound folder was gone. Not large, not obvious, but critical. Inside it had been original architectural schematics of the 17th floor, early ownership transition notes, and a physical backup of access authorization keys. Holden didn't move immediately. He simply observed. That was his habit. Reaction without emotion came first. Analysis came second. Only after that did action begin. He closed the cabinet, then stepped back into the corridor. Diane Keller arrived within 10 minutes of his call. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She rarely did. "What's missing?" she asked. Holden described the folder. Diane's expression tightened slightly. "That's not supposed to leave this cabinet." "It didn't," Holden said. "That's the point." Silence followed. Diane immediately pulled up security logs on her tablet. No forced entry, she confirmed. No maintenance requests. No recorded access. Holden nodded. So it was internal. Diane looked up. "You think someone had authorized access?" "No," Holden said. "Someone had opportunity. That difference mattered. Authorization implied permission. Opportunity implied vulnerability. The Whitaker had very few vulnerabilities, which meant this one had been created deliberately." Diane exhaled slowly. Vanessa Holden shook his head. "Unlikely." "Bradley." He didn't answer immediately, because Bradley was the obvious conclusion. But obvious conclusions were not always correct. Still, the pattern pointed in one direction. Marcus Flynn arrived that evening. He reviewed the same logs, then the same cabinet records, then the surveillance footage from adjacent corridors. After an hour, he leaned back. "This wasn't random," Marcus said. "No," Holden replied. Marcus tapped the screen. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for. Holden agreed. The question was why. Architectural schematics alone had value, but combined with access keys and transition documentation, they became something more sensitive. A roadmap. Marcus looked at him. If Bradley got this, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Holden finished it internally. If Bradley got this, he could reconstruct operational weaknesses, access points, structural dependencies, system layouts, not ownership, but function, and function could be exploited. The realization settled heavily. Not fear, assessment, a different thing entirely. Later that night, Holden met Rebecca Sutton in her office. She reviewed the situation without interruption, then closed the file. "This is escalation," she said. Holden nodded. "Yes." Rebecca leaned forward. "Then we stopped treating him like a noise problem. What do we treat him as? An actor with intent?" That word mattered. Intent changed everything legally and strategically. Holden stood near the window. Outside, Chicago lights reflected across the river like scattered data points. "He's already lost in court," Rebecca added. "Then why is he still moving?" Holden asked. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Then, because some people don't stop when they lose. They stop when they can't continue. That distinction was important. Winning and stopping were not the same thing. The next morning, Marcus confirmed another development. Bradley Pierce had been seen meeting with two individuals connected to a boutique development consultancy firm. Not unusual on its surface, except one of the individuals specialized in distressed asset acquisition strategies. Marcus highlighted the detail. "That's not marketing anymore," he said. "That's targeting." Holden read the report twice, then closed it. He understood now. Bradley was no longer trying to sell the 17th floor. He was trying to understand how it functioned beneath ownership, which meant the missing schematics were not incidental. They were purposeful. That evening, Holden returned to the Whitaker earlier than usual. The building felt different at night, quieter, more controlled, the kind of silence that makes structural sounds noticeable. Elevator hum, airflow shifts, distant mechanical cycles. He stood in the lobby for a moment before taking the service route upstairs. Diane met him near the corridor junction. "We reinforced access protocols," she said. Holden nodded. "Good." She hesitated. "There's something else." He waited. Diane handed him a printed frame capture. Security still image, time-stamped. It showed a maintenance worker entering the corridor 2 nights earlier. Holden studied it, then recognized the uniform. Not building staff, contracted service, a third-party inspection company. He looked up. "Who authorized that?" Diane shook her head. "No record." Holden's expression didn't change, but something tightened internally, because unauthorized contractors meant one thing. Someone had been given false authority credentials, or someone had fabricated them. Both possibilities were serious. Marcus arrived shortly after. He looked at the image once, then spoke. "This is how people bridge gaps." Holden understood. Gaps in security, gaps in documentation, gaps in oversight. Every system had them. The question was, who found them first? Marcus pointed at the timestamp. 2 nights ago, Bradley was meeting with development consultants. Holden finished the thought. "And this happened at the same time." Marcus nodded. "Could be coordinated." Rebecca joined them moments later via call. When she saw the image, her tone sharpened. "That worker needs to be identified immediately." Holden agreed. But something else bothered him. Bradley's behavior had changed after the court ruling. Not reduced, redirected. That was more dangerous, because reduced behavior stops. Redirected behavior adapts. By midnight, Marcus had traced the contractor. The company existed, but the worker in the image did not match any registered employee. A ghost credential. Holden stared at the report, then closed it. Now the pattern was clear. Bradley wasn't just trying to understand the floor. He was trying to reconstruct it without permission. That required access. Not legal access, functional access, which meant he was building something outside the system entirely. The next morning, Holden received a call from Diane. Her voice was controlled but urgent. "Holden, there's activity on the 15th level service hub." Holden stood immediately. "What kind of activity? Data line probing?" He paused. That was not casual behavior. That was infrastructure access testing. Someone was mapping systems, quietly, systematically. Holden ended the call and moved, fast. For the first time in months, he didn't observe first. He acted, because some situations stop being legal disputes and start becoming structural risks. By the time he reached the service hub, Marcus was already there. Rebecca arrived minutes later. Diane was monitoring feeds. The system logs confirmed it. Repeated access attempts, non-standard queries, internal mapping behavior. Marcus looked at Holden. "He's building a model of the building," Rebecca added quietly, "or trying to." Holden stared at the data stream. For a moment, everything aligned. Bradley Pierce wasn't acting like a defeated broker. He wasn't retreating. He was rebuilding, from outside the system, and that meant the confrontation in the courtroom had not ended anything. It had redirected it. Holden exhaled slowly, then made a decision. Lock everything, he said. Diane immediately began executing commands. Rebecca looked at him. You think he'll escalate again? Holden didn't answer immediately, because the answer was no longer speculation. It was timing. Finally, he said, he already has. And somewhere in the city, Bradley Pierce was about to discover that understanding a system from the outside was far more dangerous than losing control of it inside a courtroom. Because systems don't stay still, and neither does the man who built them. The Whitaker building was quiet at 2:13 a.m. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference Holden Long had learned to recognize years ago. Empty buildings had no presence. Quiet buildings still had intention. Holden stood in the service control room on the lower level watching live feeds from the 17th floor and adjacent infrastructure hubs. Diane Keller sat beside him reviewing access logs that updated in real time. Marcus Flynn leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the monitor grid. Rebecca Sutton arrived last. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. The situation had already spoken for itself. On the central screen, a new pattern appeared. Repeated login attempts. Not random, sequential, methodical. Someone was moving through the building's digital architecture like a map. Marcus pointed at the feed. That's him again. Holden didn't answer right away, because it wasn't just him. It was a system being reconstructed externally, piece by piece, from memory, from stolen fragments, from whatever Bradley Pierce had managed to extract before everything collapsed in court. Rebecca stepped closer. Where is the entry point? Diane tracked the origin. 15th floor service node. Holden's eyes narrowed slightly. That corridor had been flagged weeks earlier, after the courthouse hearing, after the deposits, after the brochures. It was no longer a mystery that Bradley was escalating. The only question was how far. Marcus spoke quietly. He's not trying to break in anymore. Rebecca looked at him. What do you mean he's trying to rebuild access permission structure? That was the dangerous part. Not intrusion. Imitation of authority. Holden watched the screen carefully. Lines of code-like activity appeared in bursts, then pauses, then adjustments. It was systematic, controlled, deliberate. The behavior of someone who believed he understood the system well enough to reconstruct it from outside. A dangerous belief, because systems built over years rarely reveal themselves fully through fragments. Holden finally spoke. Lock down the 15th floor hub. Diane nodded immediately. Already executing. But it won't stop him, Marcus added. Holden agreed. It won't. Rebecca turned toward him. Then what will Holden didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't technical. It was structural. You remove the assumption that he has access to anything at all. Silence followed. That statement wasn't about software. It was about reality. A few seconds later, an alert flashed on the monitor. Unauthorized credential simulation detected. Diane's expression tightened. He's testing authorization chains. Marcus exhaled slowly. He's trying to predict fallback access routes. Rebecca shook her head slightly. That's not guessing anymore. No, Holden said. That's planning. The room grew heavier. Outside, Chicago remained asleep. Inside, the Whitaker. Something was being reconstructed in silence. Holden watched the pattern shift again. Then again. Bradley wasn't guessing randomly. He was using previously obtained material. The stolen schematics, the corridor documentation, the fragmented access logs. All of it combined into something dangerous. A partial blueprint. Marcus straightened. He's getting closer to the service corridor backbone. Holden nodded. That's where he thinks the control structure sits. Rebecca looked at Holden. Does it know? A pause. But if he believes it does, he'll keep going. Belief was the problem. Not access. Not documentation. Belief. Because belief drives escalation, and escalation creates visibility. Visibility creates exposure. Holden made a decision. Cut external query responses for all non-authorized nodes. Diane hesitated. That will trigger alarms. I know. Another pause. Then she executed it. The system shifted. Logs tightened. Access routes narrowed. The building's digital footprint compressed into controlled channels. Marcus watched the effect. That will slow him. Holden corrected him. It will force him to reveal himself. Rebecca studied Holden. That's your goal? It wasn't a question. Holden nodded once. Yes, because at this point Bradley Pierce was no longer just a legal problem. He was an active stress test on a system that had never been designed to be manipulated externally. And stress tests always produce results. Some controlled, some not. At 2:41 a.m., another alert appeared. This one different. Physical access attempt detected. The room went still. Diane immediately pulled camera feeds. Where Marcus leaned in. Show me. The screen shifted. 15th floor service corridor. A figure in a maintenance uniform stood near a restricted panel. Holden recognized the posture immediately. Not building staff, not authorized contractor. A repeat of the ghost credential, but this time closer. Much closer. Rebecca frowned. That's him. Marcus shook his head. No face confirmation. Holden didn't speak. He was watching something else. The timing, the coordination, the alignment with digital probing. This wasn't random activity. It was synchronized. Physical and digital pressure applied simultaneously. That required coordination, not desperation. Strategy. Diane zoomed the image. The figure inserted a tool into the panel. The system reacted immediately. Security lockdown initiated. The corridor lights shifted red. Alarms didn't sound by design, but internal logs spiked instantly. Marcus turned to Holden. He's mapping response time. Holden nodded. Yes. Rebecca's tone sharpened. Then he's planning a full breach model. Holden finally looked away from the screen. No. 3 eyes turned toward him. Marcus frowned. What do you mean, no? Holden's voice remained steady. He's not breaching anything yet. A pause. He's testing how the building behaves under pressure. That distinction mattered. Breaching implies entry. Testing implies preparation. Preparation implies intent that is still evolving. Diane looked uneasy. If he completes the model? He won't. Holden interrupted. Not sharply, just decisively, because by now the pattern was fully visible. Bradley Pierce had moved from opportunist to strategist, from strategist to systems thinker. But there was still something missing. Complete understanding of control boundaries, and that would cost him. Marcus studied the screen. So what's the next move? Holden didn't hesitate. We stop reacting to him as if he's inside the system. Rebecca understood immediately. You want to shift him into full exposure? Yes. Diane looked up. That means letting him continue. Holden nodded once. Controlled continuation. Silence again, because that strategy was risky, but necessary. Some threats collapse when stopped. Others collapse when fully revealed. Bradley Pierce was becoming the second type. At 3:07 a.m., the physical figure on the 15th floor withdrew from the panel. Diane exhaled slightly. He's pulling back. Marcus watched carefully. That means he got what he needed. Rebecca turned to Holden. Did he? Holden didn't answer immediately. because that was the critical question. Then the system logs updated again. New pattern detected. Not access attempts. Not probing. Export simulation. Holden's expression changed slightly. Marcus noticed first. "What is it?" Holden stepped closer to the monitor. "He's reconstructing exit routes." Rebecca frowned. "Exit routes?" Holden nodded. From the system he thinks he understands. That was when it became clear. Bradley Pierce wasn't preparing to enter anymore. He was preparing to control narrative exit points, to define how any discovery of his actions would be interpreted, to shape aftermath before exposure. Marcus exhaled slowly. "He's trying to survive the reveal." Holden agreed. "Yes." Diane looked uneasy. "Then we're running out of time." Holden shook his head. "No." All eyes turned to him again. "We're arriving at the right time. Because systems like this don't end when someone stops them. They end when everything they've built collapses under visibility. And visibility was now inevitable." At 3:33 a.m., Rebecca received a final notification. Marcus forwarded it instantly. A confirmed external data packet tied to Bradley Pierce's activity chain had been flagged by security systems outside the Whitaker network. That meant one thing. He had reached beyond internal modeling, into external systems, real ones, legal ones, and now multiple agencies would begin noticing. Rebecca closed her laptop slowly. "That's it." Marcus nodded. He crossed the threshold. Holden watched the monitor one last time. The building's systems were now stable again, controlled, locked, documented. But the damage in motion was no longer internal. It had become external, traceable, permanent. He turned away from the screen, and for the first time in weeks, there was nothing left to observe, only consequences left to unfold. Outside, dawn was beginning to form over Chicago. The city didn't know it yet, but a quiet system conflict had just ended its hidden phase, and everything that followed would no longer be invisible. It would be recorded. The truth about Holden Long's story was never really about ownership money or even betrayal. It was about how easily people mistake what they can see for what is actually real. Vanessa trusted appearances. Bradley trusted confidence. Neither of them ever paused long enough to ask for proof, because proof feels unnecessary when emotions are louder than facts. But systems don't respond to emotions. They respond to structure, patience, and evidence. Holden didn't win because he was louder, richer, or more aggressive. He won because he understood something simple that most people forget. Time exposes everything that is built on assumption. Quiet preparation often looks like inaction until the moment it becomes undeniable truth. And in the end, what broke the illusion wasn't anger or confrontation. It was documentation, reality written down, verified, and impossible to deny. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not to underestimate others, not to rush judgments, and never to confuse silence with weakness. If this story made you think differently about patience, trust, or the people you've underestimated before, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to know what moment hit you the hardest. And if you enjoy stories like this, calm, intense, and built on hidden truths that unfold layer by layer, subscribe to the channel. The next story might just change the way you see people forever.